Vos papiers, s'il vous plaît. Pardon? Oh, okay. Well, hello, and welcome to another episode of the Hat Historian. In this video, we will be talking about a very French military hat, the Kepi. A minor symbol of France, the Kepi is often used in media like movies to show that a character is part of French law enforcement or military, and not always flatteringly, like bumbling or corrupt French policemen, conflicted French army officers, or roguish legionnaires with a murky past. Still the standard headwear of men in the French Armée de Terre, the Kepi has a long and varied past that started with France's colonial ambitions in Africa. The Kepi has its origins in the French invasion of Algeria in 1830. French troops were sent there wearing their standard uniform, which included tall shakos inherited from the Napoleonic Wars. While imposing, these headdresses were not at all adapted to the harsh North African climate, and their small visor offered minimal protection from the sun. It became clear that a new hat was needed. The model that was retained by the French army in July 1833 was a rigid cap, roughly 20 centimeters, or about 8 inches, tall, tapering towards the top, with a large visor and a button on its summit. This item was named the Casquette d'Afrique, or Africa cap. The various plaques, plumes, pom-poms, and the like that differentiated the regiments on the shakos were replaced by a system of colors. In the following years, this Casquette d'Afrique went through a few small modifications to better adapt it to field conditions, make it more comfortable, and make it easier to care for. Its shape was made tighter so that it held better on the top of the head, and its visor was curved to protect more from the sun. Soldiers could also attach a neckcloth to it to protect the back of their neck from the sun. Finally, in 1839, its height was lowered by 5 centimeters to give it a lower center of gravity and make it harder for it to be knocked off. This hat, though conceived for Africa, very quickly became popular amongst troops in the French mainland, who quickly relegated their uncomfortable shakos to parade dress. On August 24, 1849, a decree gave the Casquette d'Afrique the name it still goes by to this day, the Kepi. The word Kepi comes from the Allemanic Kepe, meaning hat. Its spelling varied at first, with it ending in a Y in many documents. The spelling became standardized with a final I in 1874, when it was applied to all the fatigue hats of the army. The Kepi was given a new shape in the beginning of the 1850s. It had shrunk, and more importantly become softer, with the internal structure of the old Casquette d'Afrique having been removed. This hat would be the one the French troops wore during the Crimean War of 1853, where the French army won many victories. With its prestige increased, many other countries adopted the Kepi as part of their standard uniform, especially French neighbors like Belgium or Luxembourg, but also several South American countries like Chile, Peru, or Paraguay, and famously the United States, where it became the standard hat for both sides during the Civil War. Officially designated Model 1858 Forge Cap, this type of Kepi was popular for its simplicity and worn by most Union troops, though others wore one that resembles more of a feed bag. Variations of it remained the standard headwear for the US military until 1902, with it going through multiple models, which were more or less stiffened. The Confederates also adopted it, though it was not as popular as with the Union troops. It was somewhat more similar to the French versions, with different colors used for different branches. This international prestige of the French army waned after its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, and some South American countries, particularly Chile, turned to Germany for style cues, as we will see in another video. In 1874, the Kepi, with its spelling stabilized, became the official service headdress for all branches of the French army, and its shape continued to evolve over the years, taking into account comments made by soldiers in the field. Its visor became slightly sloped to better protect the eyes. Ventilation eyelets were added to the sides. Its shape became somewhat oval to be more comfortable, and some decorations were added to officers to soothe their ruffled pride. In 1884, a new model, creatively named Model 1884, was developed for the men, which would remain standard until World War I. Slightly taller, fuller, and with less of a slope, it was popular with both the men, who appreciated its comfort and looks, and the army leaders, who approved of its cheapness and distinct appearance. It rapidly became a symbol of the French soldier, who had long abandoned the dress shako of previous decades. Officers, who often bought their kepis themselves and had them made by private haberdashers, often allowed themselves certain deviations from official regulations. So long as they were reasonable, the High Command, after futilely trying to suppress these modifications, turned a blind eye. Thus appeared, depending on taste and fashion, what were known as foulard kepis, more cylindrical, whose soft top formed a small bunch, or the saumure kepi, more rigid, that officers found elegant. As with all fashions, these came and went, but left a taste for a straighter kepi without a slope at the back. We can now look more closely at the group that made the kepi famous around the world with its infamous kepi blanc, or white kepi, the French Foreign Legion. Originally, they simply wore the standard red and navy hats like the rest of the infantry wore, with a 7-flame grenade on the front as their distinctive mark. However, like all troops deployed in North Africa, they were given a light-colored cloth cover to protect themselves from the sun. Eventually, this cover would be bleached white, and the legionnaires, based in and often fighting in Africa, came to regard it as a symbol of their hardiness, worthy of pride. But it wasn't until Bastille Day Parade of 1939 that this white hat, already present during some unit festivities, became their official headdress. It remained a standard kepi with a white cover until 1964, when it was simplified and was made entirely of a white material. It is the kepi that legionnaires still wear to this day. One should note, however, that only enlisted legionnaires have the right to wear a white kepi. Officers wear the old blue and red one, with their rank insignia on it. The kepi continued to be the standard combat headgear of the French armed forces until the outbreak of World War I. The French army went to war wearing the Modèle 1884, this one, but faced with the conditions of modern war, several problems rapidly became apparent. Its red color being far too visible, a blue cover was made to make it more discreet. The army began manufacturing it in horizon blue, the army's new camouflage color, and got rid of the tip at the top that soldiers said would allow water to accumulate when it rained. It's surprising that it took so long for them to realize this. Officers adopted simpler kepis in the trenches, without rank insignia to avoid being targeted by snipers. But the reality was that the kepi did not protect from the shrapnel of this new kind of war, and so a combat helmet, the Adrian, replaced it. The kepi was permanently relegated to barracks or parade wear, war having evolved beyond it. Freed from the constraints of field wear, it became once more slightly more ornate, and one should note, less practical. Its sides became perfectly straight, forming an elongated cylinder, and it became rigid once more. Sometimes named the polo kepi, after a style worn behind the lines by officers in World War I, it was roughly 8 centimeters tall and had a slightly sloped visor. Finally, the kepi as it is now best known appeared in 1935. With a flat visor, a rigid shape, and a height between 105 and 110 millimeters depending on rank, with French officers wearing rank bars on the top of their hats, it was now only worn as part of the dress uniform and has scarcely changed since. It remains the standard dress headgear for men of the French army, with different colors depending on the branch of service. The kepi, as I previously stated, was also spread around the world and remains in use in a number of countries. A branch that is well known for wearing it in France is the gendarmerie, one of the 2 law enforcement branches, and it spread this practice to some of its former colonies. The dress uniform for the gendarmes in countries such as the Comoros, Central African Republic, or Gabon include a kepi very similar to the French one, which I'm wearing, as does the police in Pondichéry. The Luxembourg police also wears a kepi as part of its dress uniform, as do a certain number of Scandinavian armed forces. A form of the kepi is also worn by American train conductors, and as the dress hat for some firemen. Finally, the patrol cap of the US Army is a form of kepi, and is said to be descended indirectly from it. The kepi is thus very present, though it has seen a slight decline in recent years, which I regret, as I find it to be an elegant hat. It was replaced as the headgear of the French National Police by a simple cap in 1982, and was relegated to formal wear in the French Customs and Gendarmerie in 1994 and 2002 respectively. It remains the ceremonial headdress, for some civilian groups such as French firemen and forest rangers. So while less present, this French symbol has not vanished. I hope once again you found this video interesting and that you'll join me again soon for another hat. Until then, I tip my hat to you.